Just getting the stream kicked off here. I need one moment for good old Instagram to be the last one, as per usual. So wait one more second on that. Come on, Instagram, you can do it. Kind of annoying. It's like, hey, you gotta wait. If it doesn't connect in like 2 seconds, I'm sorry, Instagram, you're not getting it today. Oh, I think that's my fault, actually. Okay, I need one more second. Look, I'm unprepared. I apologize. I didn't turn it on. That's my fault this time. Just this one time, Instagram. Cool. So today I'm going to be talking about my previous newsletter issue, which is failing interviews. And I thought this would be a super interesting topic to go over because I think when we're talking about advice for like anything, right? If it's programming advice, if it's career advice and stuff like that, I think a lot of the time, and probably rightfully so, there's a lot of like follow this guidance, like here's the happy path, here's what you should focus on. But I feel like we don't often talk about like when things don't go right. And I think that's important because those are real experiences that people have. And I think that if we start talking about them a little bit more, it almost like normalizes, or I'm hoping that it helps normalize it, right? So I think, like, I'm a big fan. I know it's not the same topic, but imposter syndrome is one of these things where I feel like when people talk about it more, we start to realize, yes, it is a real thing. Yes, everyone goes through it. Yes, it's okay. And the more that you talk about it and you're hearing about it from other people, the more that you start to go, you know what, like, yeah, it sucks to go through, but other people do this as well. And like it almost just feels like you can relate to people. And then not that it fixes it, but like there's a bit less of a burden on you as you're going through this. So I wanted to talk about that from the perspective of interviewing. I think that, given especially like the job market and stuff, there's a lot of people, especially like I see on social media, a lot of people worrying about, if they're trying to get into the industry, whether they're career switchers or boot camp grad, if you're a college or university grad, you're self-taught, whatever it happens to be. I know that there's a lot of people that are concerned and trying to figure out how to navigate all this. So while there's tons of advice out there, and I recommend that you're finding resources and stuff that work for you, I think the reality is, and what I want to focus on, is that even if the stars align and you have the most amazing interview and you've impressed your interviewers, things can still be outside of your control, and like there might be someone else that just so happens to do better that day. So like at the end of the day, there are going to be situations where things don't go as planned for you, and I want to make sure that you're okay with that, right? Like I don't want you to feel defeated when it happens. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Elemental Magic's card game. It's a good username. Hello, it goes well. Good to see you on Twitch, which reminds me, folks, please feel free to use the chat. I always like letting people know where the most people are coming from. And right now, it is Twitter or X, but YouTube is surprisingly close in second place. That's usually not the case. I actually don't know if LinkedIn, if you're watching this on LinkedIn, if you want to go ahead and send a message in the chat, that would be super helpful so I know it's coming through. I would hate to go through all of this and then miss the YouTube or the LinkedIn folks. So cool. And I'm seeing Instagram's working, so I'm in the, yeah. And this is, so Varshil, thanks for your comment. So sorry, folks, the Instagram comments don't come in on the feed, so I apologize for that. I try to read them out when I can. So users saying, I'm in the top 3% in Lead Code contests and still not able to land internships at big tech and 2 years of experience as well. So there are going to be situations like this. Elemental Magic's card game says, I didn't fail any interviews. I crushed my interview. Now there are no more interviews. I think I hunted them to extinction. So that's objectively false, but I'm glad that your interviews went well for you. That's good news. Elaine, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, so I apologize, but you're close. Awesome. Justin on LinkedIn is working. Hi, Justin. Good to see you. So yeah, folks, as I'm going through this, please feel free to ask questions and stuff in the chat. I am happy to kind of derail what I'm talking about to answer your questions as soon as I have a moment to breathe. And I always say this on my live streams, but I would much rather be spending time answering the things that you're asking and wanting to talk about in the chat, because otherwise I would just record a YouTube video. So this is time that I want to be for you. So I'm hoping that we can use it for that. Hamza, good to see you. Elemental Magic's best result is around 99.99% contest. Still can't get interviews for junior positions. Yeah, it's challenging right now. So I want to be able to talk through this, and I have other advice and other resources and stuff like that about how to do, in my opinion, how to help succeed in interviews and my perspective on that. This talk today is going to be sort of the opposite. It's going to be like you're going to fail an interview, and that's okay. And I want to talk through that. So I just want to give you some different perspective as we go through this, because I don't want people to go through their interviews and feel like beat up from it, and then they're down on themselves, and then they're like, well, I never want to interview again, like it was a terrible experience. Like, we got to get back to it. Okay, so that's going to be the goal in today's conversation. If you want, and I'm not saying you have to or anything, the live streams that I do at this time, I just put a link into the chat to weekly.devleader.ca. That is my newsletter. If you want to know what I'm going to be streaming about, it's basically going to be the topic of the weekend prior. So this weekend I put out this newsletter about failing your interviews and my perspective on that. I will be sharing a personal experience about how I failed an interview at Google before Microsoft. So I'll be talking through that. I do have a video coming out later this week. If you're watching this recorded, depending on when you're watching it, it might already be out. But I will be going into more detail in an edited YouTube video on my my Google interview failure. And what else do I want to say before I get into it? That might be all. But yeah, definitely, chime in the chat. Infected FPS, good to see you. I remember one more thing I want to say. I just want to read Infected FPS's comment here. I feel my experience has been wildly different than most. Only ever interviewed 3 times, only failed out of 1, which ended up being bullet dodged. Awesome. That's great to hear. I think statistically that's probably very different than what a lot of people are going through. I'm not sure when this happened. If this was more recent, that's, great for you, honestly. But I think I'm hearing a lot more that people are even struggling to even land the interviews, which is why I wanted to talk about, if you happen to finally land one and you fail it, like, it's okay. There will be more, even though it doesn't feel like it. The other thing that I forgot that I wanted to mention is that I will be live streaming tomorrow morning. So right now for me, it's 9 p.m. PST. So hopefully at 7 a.m. PST tomorrow morning, I'll be live streaming. That will be coding. I'm going to be going through Azure Blob Storage and just kind of walking through some basics with that. It's not going to be super in-depth. It's not going to be, extreme detail and best practices. It's just going to be leveraging Azure Blob Storage to work through some, we'll probably do like a console application just to play with the API and stuff. So we'll try that out. I imagine the standards of passing interviews are much higher now as well. Yeah, this is probably true. Given the volume of applicants, I would wager that's probably the case overall. Not only just passing interviews, but even just, and I should talk about this as well, but like even getting your resume seen. So I'll try to touch on this a little bit. Yeah, and I would, Infected FPS, yeah, like going back maybe about 10 years ago, the 2021. Great that you had that experience, but yeah, I think, like, even in my own experience, like, I'm trying to think, even when I had internships, like, oh man, I'm getting older now, like over 12 years ago, I guess, like, internships for me, those interviews, like, didn't seem like I was totally, bombing them or anything. So yeah, I think maybe, things are changing in that regard, but one of the takeaways, like, spoiler alert, one of the takeaways from this entire conversation is going to be the fact that there are so many things that are outside of your control that you might even just have, like, if you have a panel of interviewers, you might have a couple people that maybe they suck at interviewing, maybe they're focused on things that I personally wouldn't agree with that you might not like, and the decision doesn't work out in your favor. And it sucks, but like these types of things happen, and there isn't like, I don't know, like a perfectly uniform way that everyone interviews across the board. So the best we can do is talk about the general approach, and like I said, there's plenty of resources on that. So okay, cool. Okay, so let's dive into the conversation here. So um, I just wanted to pull up my newsletter so I have a frame of reference here. So okay, so I wanted to start kind of by talking about the fact that like when you're going through interviews, or let me back up one more second on the resume front. Okay, so you're applying to jobs. Um, I actually had a call with someone yesterday, a student from the University of Waterloo. I don't know if he'll watch these or not, but I was having a conversation with him about internships and resumes and things like that. And I should plug my own. I have a vlog channel called Code Commute, and I talked about this in the episode that I'm currently uploading it while I live stream. Probably shouldn't do that, but one of the topics that I was going over was the same conversation I had with this student, which was around the idea of like volume for your resumes. So the thing that I always like to say to people is, yes, I think networking is super important. I think networking and having genuine interactions with people, building that up, it's a long-term play. It's not just while you're job searching. It's not something where you just reach out to someone randomly and you're like, hey, give me a referral and whatever, like hope for it. It's a long-term play. It's an investment into sort of, building your network and people that you can regularly interact with. Like, you don't want to just try to like use it as a shortcut. But when you're applying to jobs and using like you're applying and sending your resume in, like you can do this more in volume. Yes, you can, and you could and possibly should be tailoring your resume to jobs that you really want, but you have the, like, call it luxury of more easily sending out applications in bulk, right? So the example that I was giving this student and that I talked about on my vlog was that if you take two individuals that are identical, hypothetically, okay, and individual A applies to 10 jobs, and let's say they're going to be the same jobs individual B applies for, same resume. Individual B instead, though, applies instead to 10 jobs, they apply to 100 jobs. Statistically, individual B will have a 10 times greater chance of landing a job, or at least landing an interview in this example. So the point here being like, whatever likelihood, whatever percentage chance you have of landing an interview is going to be like multiplied by the volume of applications you're doing. Now, if you have a terrible resume or something and you have a 0% chance, like 0 times anything is going to be 0. But my point in general is going to be volume can work in your favor in this case. So I do encourage you to apply to more jobs, but I also encourage you to be spending the time building up your network, because that's going to be incredibly valuable, not only during your job search, but beyond that. It could be later in your career, it could be your next job search, but that kind of thing takes time. So don't rush that part. The job applications more in volume, that could be a little bit more rushed because it's just easier to do. And I think you'll have better success with building up relationships when you genuinely try to do that versus just, DMing 100 people and saying, review my resume. Like, doesn't fly so well. So that's what I wanted to preface here. Focusing on the interview portion itself, though. Okay, so one thing that I want to call out in the beginning of this talk is that going through the interview, there are going to be situations where it's not just you. Okay, so it's easy that we can get down on ourselves and like blame ourselves for certain things. It's also very easy to do the opposite and just blame the interviewer. But there are literally some situations that are just not in your control. And I think that it's important to acknowledge what these things are. So In general, I would say from the perspective of like coding questions, and maybe I'll back up 1 second here. Not all, but many interviews follow a format that's kind of like what I'll explain here. Especially big tech interviews are kind of like this pattern, where you will have a combination of, say, like a coding question, a system design question, and then like behavioral interview questions. And this, it will depend where you are, which company, and what level you're at. But usually you have these three things mixed in, and you kind of layer on the fact that you'll have different interviewers. The more junior you are, it's likely that you'll not be asked any or many system design questions. And it's just because the likelihood of the expectation that you have that knowledge is lower. You might get one, it might be more simple, but generally that's kind of a rarer thing. You might get more like coding questions, like lead code style, than some behavioral ones. I would say the more senior you become, the more emphasis there is on like a system design type of thing, because those are the scales of problems that you'll be looking at more. You'll still get coding questions, you'll still get behavioral questions. And then for me, like when I was interviewing to be a manager at Google, at Facebook, at Amazon, at Microsoft, I had all of those types of questions. And for me, it was usually like one coding question, and in one instance there were none. So one coding question or none, some system design questions almost in every single case, I believe, and then a lot more like behavioral interview questions. Okay, so those are the types of things that you'll see across the board. Depending on your level and where you're applying to, they might shift. On the perspective of like coding questions though. What's a behavioral question? Sure. So examples of behavioral questions are like, can you tell me about a time where you were working with a team member that was challenging to work with? Or could you tell me about a time that you were leading a project? Or tell me about a time where you partnered with another team to deliver a project successfully? Or a lot of these types of questions will focus on like call it like a key competency that the company is interested in. So like Amazon, for example, has leadership principles that they publish. And these types of questions, there's a goal when they're asking you that. So sometimes people hear these questions and they'll hear, tell me about a project where some situation. And what the interviewee is hearing is like, okay, what is a project that I can just talk about? And then they talk about the project and they kind of miss like why the interviewer was asking the question. Okay, so behavioral questions are about scenarios, and it's going to be more about the things that are outside of writing code and technology. So it's not going to be like, hey, optimize this. It's going to be more like, here's a scenario, walk me through what your experience has been like in that situation. Hopefully that helps. Let me know if you want more clarification on that though. So for coding questions, I would say like, I feel like a lot of the time, especially in big tech, coding questions are like a gamble. There is a lot of focus on like these lead code style questions. There's nothing wrong with lead code. I just personally feel like it does not represent real software engineering. Like, I don't want to say at all, but like, it's a pretty unique skill set. I've already seen people in the chat. I think it was Elemental Magic Card Game was saying, you know, they're, and even from Instagram as well. The message isn't showing up in the chat, but they're saying like, you know, like top percentage of like lead code questions and not landing interviews and stuff. And it's like, that's kind of separate from even getting the interview in the first place. But being good at lead code questions means that you have a leg up in the interview. And I don't want to say like that's all, but like when it comes to like building software in teams, I don't think lead code questions, from my experience, they don't go as far as people like to think. So I don't really know why there's such a focus in big tech and other companies to focus on lead code style questions. I just don't think that they're representative of what we're doing on the job. But these things come up a lot. I don't like that people try to set up the questions to have like a trick to them. Like there's a trick optimization. It just like the whole thing feels kind of gross to me. But some people love practicing lead code questions, like they enjoy the problem solving and stuff. So I'm not trying to say don't go do that, don't learn them. If you enjoy it, especially, by all means. But it is good for interviewing. I always say it's good for interviewing, unfortunately. But so the point here is that the questions that you might get that are lead code style, it is a bit of a gamble. And depending on the interviewer you have, because I've seen this kind of thing being on the panel of interviewers, where you'll have someone say like, oh, they answered it like the basic way, but they couldn't get the little optimization. Like they couldn't find the trick to optimizing it. So like they didn't do well. And in my head, I'm thinking like, why are you scoring them whether or not they found the trick? Like, what's the goal of this question? How good they are at finding tricks, or how good they are at coding? So it just feels really bizarre. But you can always end up with questions like this. When I go through my example, for Google, I had something kind of like this where it was like kind of just I stumbled on it. So I'm seeing some messages in the chat here. Okay, so Elemental Magic's card game. So I think I always knew it wasn't purely technical, but I still have no idea how they were evaluating my answers. So I'll take I don't like I'm really bad at like sales pitches, but I'm going to, instead of waiting to the end, I'm going to advertise this now just so that you know it's available. And I always like mentioning, like, I put out tons of free content. So anytime I have something that's like for sale, it's because it's more guided and structured. But like, you could probably go through all of the content I have across everywhere and try to piece it together and come up with things like this. But if I jump over to the full screen mode here, so I did just launch a course with Ryan Murphy. It's on Dome Train. I will also put this in the chat if you're interested. But I'm going to scroll down just so you can see the curriculum here, okay? So the curriculum, it's 6 hours long, but we do talk about things like common questions, right? So these are all about behavioral interviews and styles of questions you can get. We talk about what it's like to look through the manager's lens when we're going through interviews. We talk about what it's like when you're in the interview, what to focus on, how to prepare for it. And there's even a section where, so I did this with Ryan Murphy, and Ryan Murphy and I interview each other. I think Ryan used his real career examples. I did not, but we also didn't know how we were going to answer for each other. By the way, people on Instagram, I'm really sorry that this doesn't like display properly. If I can move it over a little bit, it might center. I'm so sorry about that. It looks terrible. But we do have this course available, and we'll have more courses coming out that aren't just programming, because Dome Train has historically been like .NET and C# kind of stuff. So we've signed up for more courses. But anyway, this is nailing the behavioral interview up here. And if you check out the top, there is a sale right now for 30% off. So it's like not so bad. But that is my plug. I'm going to switch back to the full camera mode here. That's my face. There you go. Cool. So going back to the chat. Elemental Magic's card game. It's important just to understand that the interviewer is asking you a behavioral question, not because the goal is to hear all the technical details about the project. The goal is because they're trying to get you to explain some type of behavior that they're interested in. So I think a good example of this is if you're interviewing, if you take Amazon, for example, their published leadership traits that they're looking for, those principles, there's a big list of like 20 or something. They're going to be asking you questions that relate to those things. So you want to find ways to, when you're hearing the question, like, which one of these are they interested in hearing about? Like, why are they asking me this question? And don't just blab at them about the technical details of a project. So that's my advice on that. Hearing someone go on about how they designed and implemented something, always going further than LC in my book, you get a better idea of their thought process and their main competencies. Yeah, I think the lead code stuff, I just don't think does a lot. I was also talking to this student yesterday, and I said, personally, I like more conversational interviews. because I like people being natural talking about things, and I think that's important. Oops. Back in the days, I prefer finding interview questions from GitHub about specific tech stack. Yep. So, Burhan from Facebook, thanks for joining, man. It's good to see you on here. I appreciate it. But yeah, like especially for I mean, you can find resources for this kind of stuff everywhere. So that's why when I said like we have a course on this stuff, it's just that it's curated. Some people find that like you know, paying for a course and being like, I have accountability now because I paid for this thing, and they like it being organized. That works well for some people. But literally, like, you can find information about examples and this kind of stuff all over. You can ask ChatGPT for like example coding questions for an interview or system design or even behavioral questions. Like, you have lots of resources to do this. So, then most companies I've worked with told me I had the strongest interview in their company's history. I can confirm it not translate to being the best employee at the company. Not saying I'm bad, of course. Okay. I see sometimes they really like experts of the little things. Yeah, it depends, right? Depends on the company and kind of what they're after. Sometimes people are really looking for that kind of thing. Um, you don't need to bother whoever listens to this on Instagram. This app is trash, and so are they. Okay. Okay. I actually am going to remove that because I don't think that that's not okay, and I don't know how to remove that. So I have to remove that. I'm sorry. I can't have that in my chat. Yeah, I apologize. I didn't mean for that to be up in chat for so long. That's 100% not okay. Let me go ahead and that's kind of embarrassing. I'm trying to remove it from my chat and it's not working, so oh boy. Okay, let's see if this refreshed. No. Okay, I'm keeping the chat still works for me. I'm just not going to show it because it only takes one person to kind of ruin it. So I apologize for folks that were reading the chat. I don't have any words for that kind of thing, but that's just not cool. Lost a subscriber, and that's okay. Please don't ever do that. Okay, let's go back to getting on track here. And sorry, Varshal on Instagram. How can I get interviews at big tech, as I had a referral from SD2s as well? What do you recommend? The thing, someone asked me this the other day about referrals and my thoughts on them. Depends, right? If you have referrals, it depends what the referral looks like. So the example I gave is, I know that some people, if you ask them for referrals, they'll just, if their company like doesn't need a lot of details, they'll just give you a referral. And if someone, I'm just being honest here, if someone came to me and said, hey, I'm referring this person, and I said, great, like, tell me about them, and they're like, I don't know, I just referred them, like, I've never worked with them, that would carry 0 weight to me. Like, that doesn't that doesn't do anything. So if instead, if the referral is someone speaking highly of someone, I've worked with them, I can vouch for them, that carries some weight to me. But I'm not everyone, and I'm not every company. So sometimes you can have referrals. I'll give you an example. Like, I was talking about referrals even from me into to some positions that were open on a partner team, and they had told me, like, we've already closed the loop. So they've accepted the round of candidates to be, oh, my headphones fell, to be, they accepted the round of candidates to be interviewed already. So even if I have a referral, they're like, doesn't matter at this point. So the position, like the job posting, needs to go up again in order for me to have that referral go through. And even then, it's up to them if they want to take it or not. Can I do a quick check if anyone's on the chat? I actually don't know if it's not coming through now. So if you want to do me a favor and send a message in the chat just to let me know it's coming through, because I tried to block the YouTube comment, and now I have this. Oh, infected FPS, perfect, thank you. Just going to say, I don't see any chat messages now, and I don't know if it's busted, so that's good news. Okay, so that does work. Thanks, folks. Please be kind in the chat. So referrals sometimes become a way to favor someone who didn't deserve it. Yeah, it's all like, the reality is, if someone again, just being transparent, if someone came to me with a referral, it doesn't mean they just get the job or something, right? So it's more just about understanding, like, what I would say it short circuits is, like, if your resume is going into a pile to be reviewed either by automation or recruiters or hiring managers, you, with a referral, you might short circuit that path and then at least get it into the eyes of the hiring manager sooner, which can carry a ton of weight. But it doesn't mean that, like, your interview is going to be something that you know, pass with flying colors, right? So, and like I said, it doesn't even guarantee you get the interview. It's just, it helps bypass some of those other things. This will look different everywhere as well. Okay, so not only can coding, I'm just going back to the topic here. So not only can coding questions, like lead code style questions, just kind of be a bit of a crapshoot, a bit of a gamble, but the same thing can happen with behavioral questions, right? So this kind of thing happens all the time, where you might get a question and it's a scenario that you're like, I actually have never experienced something like this. Someone's saying, if you were able to communicate the subject through the background, people may stay. Which background? I don't know what they're referring to. Thanks, Caster, but I'm not sure what you're referring to there. So with behavioral questions, you might not have ever encountered it, and sometimes this gets people flustered. So they panic and they're just like, oh, I don't know, and they just try to fit Caster, I mean, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm talking about failing interviews. I set a title on the stream. I don't know. I mean, behind him. Oh, you, like, I could put a banner behind me. Interesting. Oh, thanks. That's something I didn't think about. So sorry for folks that don't see it. Like on TikTok, you can set up like background stuff. Maybe I should do this on my stream in general. I appreciate that, Caster Troy. That's good advice. I'll consider that for my next stream. Thanks. So for folks that are just joining, I'll say it verbally. Sorry, I should do a better job of this. I'm not a streamer. I'm a software engineering manager. But if you're just joining, we're talking about failing. We're talking about failing interviews. So on the behavioral questions, not only can you get stuff you've never experienced, sometimes you can just draw blanks if you're like me. Like, I am really bad at testing and exams, and I get flustered and draw blanks. So there might be a situation where someone can ask me a behavioral question, and like, I might go, I know I have a good project to talk through for this, and like, it's just not coming to me. So you can have situations like that. Sometimes these things, like I said, they can feel like they're just outside of your control. Another one I wanted to call out is that, yes, it's entirely possible that you just have interviewers that are challenging to work with. And I kind of hinted at this earlier in the talk, but I have been on panels. I've been an engineering manager for 12 years, been interviewing that whole time. And the point that I want to get across here is, like, when we go to do the debriefs and we're coming together and talking through how the interview went, I have absolutely talked with other people that were part of the interview loop and been like, I don't think that was a fair way to assess this person. So I think that's, something to think about, is like, sometimes that's just outside of your control. So as we're going through all this, you might be thinking like, man, like, this totally sucks because I'm going to go through all this effort. I'm going to finally get that interview. And then what? I'm going to have all these things that don't work in my favor and it's going to totally suck. So, like, no, but you might fail it, and it's okay. So now that we're getting past this part, I want to mention it's okay, and I want to walk you through my big failure before Microsoft, because I think it's an interesting one, because I totally had this failed interview. So this will be, I'll go into more detail in my YouTube video that's hopefully out on Wednesday. It's about 20 minutes long on this exact topic, specifically this interview that I had. But I want to share it with you because it's real. I can't remember all the exact details, like the exact question and stuff, but I totally bombed this, and I think it's important that you hear that, like, you I don't know, depending where you're coming from, if you see me on LinkedIn and stuff, you might say, oh, like, look, he's successful at Microsoft. But like, Like, yeah, it doesn't mean I don't fail interviews. Like, it's, it's a thing that happens. So I wanted to talk through this because I think that it's helpful for other people to hear. So before I got my job at Microsoft, I was actually applying to a bunch of big tech companies. So I applied to like, to Amazon, to Google, to Facebook, to Microsoft. And in my process, I was fortunate enough that I had interviews lined up for all these places, which is cool. So that's great. But Google was the first one out of the group to start scheduling the interviews for me. So, okay, the context that I need to add here is that I hadn't interviewed in 8 years. So, interviewing is a skill. And if you get where I'm going with this, I was absolutely like new to interviewing. I used to do it all the time for my internships. In university, I had 6 internships, and every 4 months you would be interviewing for your co-op position. So I used to do it a ton, but I hadn't for 8 years. And not only that, like big tech in particular has like I've been describing, like you have like these lead code style questions, you have your system design stuff. I'm like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. So I had to spend a lot of time practicing. I had to make sure I was practicing lead code, system design, my behavioral stuff. But it's like you have to practice a ton. So I knew that this was going to be something I was wildly uncomfortable with, but kind of got to do it. Okay, so that's what I want to frame this up with. So my Google interview, I think it was 5 rounds. It could have been 4, but I had 1 coding question. I had, I believe, 2 system design questions, and then the remaining were all behavioral interviews. And this was for a software engineering manager position. So when I applied to big tech, it was only software engineering management positions. So as I'm telling you this, I think all that's really going to change is like the types of questions that I was getting asked. So if you're a junior software engineer or a senior software engineer, you'll probably see a similar type of thing. Okay, so it's not going to change it too much. But when I was going into this, I thought, okay, my experience as an engineering manager, I feel like on the behavioral interview questions, like I think I got this. And I felt pretty confident because, like I said, I had been interviewing other people for a long time. And all that I had to really do was make sure that I could recall scenarios like effectively. Because if someone's asking me a behavioral question, I think I can do a decent job of figuring out what they're trying to ask for and they're trying to learn. And as long as I don't draw a blank, and like say I only had 1 scenario to work with, if I drew a blank, I'd be screwed. So I just tried to make sure I had a bunch of scenarios that I could pick and choose from. So that's how I practiced for those ones, but it wasn't so bad. And I thought that I would do well on that part. One of the other things I thought I would do at least okay at, like I'm not good at lead code because I don't do it. But I figured at least for me as a software engineering manager, my role was a little bit unique for those 8 years because I was coding every single day at the same time. So some engineering managers just don't write code anymore. And in fact, like I don't write code in my day job at Microsoft. For the past 4 years at Microsoft, I don't write code. I code every single day outside of work, but at Microsoft, I don't. In this previous role, I was coding every single day. So I figured, okay, one of my places to shine in my interview is if I can nail that coding question, I'm set, right? I'm going to hopefully nail the coding question, hopefully nail the behavioral stuff, and the system design pieces I can say like okay, I can navigate my way through, I'm hoping. Hey, Xcoding, good to see you. I appreciate that you are always joining the stream, so thanks a lot. It means a lot to me. So in this situation, I'm like, okay, I think the sort of the gamble is going to be with these system design questions because I'm not really sure what I'm getting myself into. So to kick things off, my first interview out of all of these, out of this interview loop, let's call it, the first one was the coding question. And I can't remember the exact question, but I remember hearing it and being like, okay, I don't know it off the top of my head. Like I don't have like a, instantly I'm going to go code this thing up. So I did what I feel like is recommended in a lot of interviews, which is to ask clarifying questions. If you just make assumptions and start coding things, like you might just go down the wrong path. So ask some clarifying questions. And then I said to the interviewer, okay, I think that I have like a naive or, a basic solution that should work for this. So I'd like to try walking you through coding that first, and then I want to try and optimize it. So that was the approach I had, because I would much rather have something that works, that needs to be optimized, versus like not writing anything down. So I remember coding it up and explaining it and walking through the test cases, and then kind of looking at the time and being like, I'm not going to have time to optimize this. So I just remember saying to the interviewer, okay, like, here's why I think that this is inefficient. And like, here's the area that I think that I need to focus on to improve it. And kind of that's as far as I got. So at the end of the coding interview, I was pretty frustrated because I felt like I totally dropped the ball on being able to demonstrate my coding abilities. Like, no, I didn't like fumble and like forgot how to do an if statement or something, but I just feel like this person was probably like, oh man, like this guy can't even figure this question out. Like, so I felt kind of embarrassed. I felt frustrated. And the part that really sucked for me was like, well, two parts, right? One, that's an area I was really hoping to shine. And number two, that was the beginning of the day. And I got 4 more interviews to go. And I've already felt like, man, I screwed that up. So, and Xcoding and others that are just joining right now, this whole talk is about failing interviews. And I'm sharing my experience right now with failing a Google interview. And then after, I'm going to talk about sort of my advice for people that have failed interviews, what you can do and kind of move forward from that. So someone, and I understand the advice now, someone on TikTok was actually saying I should try to put like a banner up. I never thought about this, but when people are joining the stream, they can just see like what I'm talking about. Obviously, I'm not a good streamer, so I'm working on it. But okay, so that was the first interview of the 5, and I'm like, I'm already screwed. Okay, next up though, I have system design questions, and to be totally honest, I can't remember the first system design question I had, but it was a pretty like typical like a database involved, distributed system. I think there were payments, and usually when you have payments and stuff, you want to talk about like transactions and sagas, and this idea that when you're building this type of system, you need to make sure that if a payment's going through, like you're not basically charging people for stuff that they're not getting, or you're not missing the charge, or you're not like double charging. So like there's some interesting constraints around that. But that one, I feel like when I was talking with the interviewer, there wasn't a moment where I was like, oh man, like I totally screwed this up. So I feel like that one actually went pretty well. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but I didn't leave that one feeling like, dude, like, cover your face because he totally bombed that one. So far, I'm like 1 out of 2 for my interviews. Okay. So I kind of like recovering a little bit. That's not so bad. And then the third question that I had to go in was another system design question. And spoiler alert, this is the one that I am confident caused me to fail this whole thing. So this question was about, and context, I had worked in digital forensics software for 8 years prior. It was all desktop software, a little bit of stuff in the cloud, but certainly not big distributed systems with data centers. And this question was about literally machines communicating in a data center, trying to talk about different ways to like effectively route traffic. And I just remember when the interviewer started explaining this, I remember thinking like, I don't know anything about this question. Like that was the first thing that came to mind, was like, I don't even know where to start. Oh, Burhan joined on TikTok also. Whenever I had a big interview, even my stable internet connection becomes so bad. Yeah, it's like everything goes bad. So this question, I just remember thinking, okay, I don't know the answer at all. But what's the advice I've always had for going through interviews? It's like, just try to keep moving things forward. And especially with system design questions, a lot of the time you will get open-ended questions, and it's on purpose. And it's because the interviewer is expecting that you will ask clarifying questions to understand the constraints and requirements of the system. So when I got this question, I was like, number one, I have no idea what this is about. But number two, I still have this opportunity to be asking questions, right? This is my time to go clarify as much as I can. And that's what I did. I asked him questions back to try and get constraints for it. And then from there, I told the interviewer, I said, I'm going to try answering this to the best of my abilities. And I expect that I'm going to get a little bit stuck. So I probably have some follow-up questions. And he said, okay. So I started to answer it. In Spiritual Mind, we're going through failing interviews and what to do after that. So I'm just sharing my story for failing my Google interview from before Microsoft. So I started answering this guy's question, and I remember thinking, like, it's not going good. Like, I knew like 5 minutes in, I'm like, this is not going to be an okay question. So inevitably, I got to a point where I said, okay, like, here's what I'm thinking, here's why. And I could tell that he's just like sitting there not impressed, like waiting for more. And I'm like, okay, time for more clarifying questions. And I kept doing this, and I kept trying to progress my answer, but watching his body language and stuff, I'm like, he's looking for more, and he's looking for something that I'm not giving him. So towards the end of that interview, I just remember being in this position where I'm like, I've kind of exhausted like what I'm able to do in terms of asking for more clarifying questions. He's not really giving me anymore. So we had a little bit of time left in the interview, and I remember saying to him, like, hey, like, would you mind like explaining to me like sort of your perspective on what you were hoping I would go further and deeper on? So he explained to me, and again, I can't remember the exact details of the question, but what he was looking for was, at some level, I needed to have an understanding of the network cards, specifically like the network interfaces on the cards inside of the machines in the data center. And for context, I was not applying for a role that needed to know anything about machines in the data center at all. So I think at this point, when I kind of heard him say that, and like knowing that I totally bombed that part of the interview, I just remember being like, I'm pretty mad. Like, that feels very unfair. It feels like I got set up with a person that was asking me a question that I was never going to pass. And even if I studied as many system design questions as I possibly could, I never would have passed that. Like, I wasn't studying anything about hardware for machines in a data center. So I just remember being like pretty upset about that. But I'm not done the interview. I still got to go through the behavioral ones, and we're not going to focus on those for this conversation because it's not really the point of it. But those ones went well, so I got to shine during those, and that part was great. That's not the focus of this conversation because this is all about failing. So I remember finishing that and being like, okay, if we recap, coding one at the beginning, bomb that. System design question after that, did okay. Bombed the next one, and then did good on the behavioral ones. And in my head, I'm going, okay, they're hiring an engineering manager. Engineering managers need to have technical background, but we spend most of our time dealing with people-related things. And there's different places that will say, and people have different opinions about this, like engineering managers have to be super technical, whatever. Like, you need to have a technical understanding, no doubt, but most of the time we're not writing code in our roles. And if you are, I would say you're not doing an effective job managing people, or you don't have many people to manage. Ask me how I know, because I've done it for 12 years, and 8 of those years I wrote code and managed people. And the only way I could do it was working like 60 to 80 hours a week. You don't have time to do both effectively. So I was thinking, okay, coding one didn't do so well, system design one didn't do so well, but maybe like it was impressive enough on the other side that I did okay, maybe, but no. So the recruiter ended up giving me the feedback, and he said it's going to be a no from us. So wasn't totally shocked, was kind of anticipating that. Unfortunate as it is. And he said, we thought that you did amazing on like the sort of the people and the project side of things. Like, you definitely have experience managing teams and things like that, managing projects. So I was like, okay, like pat on the back. Like, that's the part I thought I was definitely going to rock. So that's good. And then this is the part that I really didn't like, but he said, we felt that you weren't technical enough. And I remember being like, oh, like, come on, man. And I'll tell you why I don't like that answer. And I know why I got the answer. It's because I bombed those questions. Like, That's why. That's what they used to gauge whether or not I was technical. But the part that really bothered me was like, I've been at that point professionally programming for how many years is that? For 10 years professionally programming, 17 years of programming in general. I code every single day. I had two patents, two more pending. I had built a lot of the like original parts of products for the forensic company I was at, and I was like, there's no way that I'm not technical. So it was really like frustrating to hear that. Like, what do you mean I'm not technical enough? I'm going to answer this question in the chat though. Can you please share how you prepare for interviews? What's your preparation strategy? What things do you revise? So yes, spiritual mind, I will touch on that in just a moment. I want to see if I can wrap up the Google part, and then I'm going to come back to this because this is a really good question. I want to get that cleared up for folks. So the part that I just want to mention kind of briefly at this point is like, okay, so I don't get the job with Google. Bummer, right? And I've been purposefully trying to touch on a few different emotions that I experienced, because if you have failed interviews, you've probably felt some of these emotions at different points in time. And I wanted to say these out loud because I'm hoping that if you're watching or listening, you'll go, at least for some of you, right? You'll say, I remember feeling that way. I remember feeling like, for me, I was sad. I was sad I didn't get that job because I thought that I would be able to demonstrate my abilities, something that I wanted, and not getting it, I was sad, right? I mentioned that I was frustrated at different points. I was angry at one point. Like I should have mentioned confused. Confusion's a good thing, like to describe that. All of these things are normal emotions to feel. And I wanted to say that because I think some people like almost feel like ashamed of feeling some of those things, or like you're not allowed to feel that way. But like you absolutely are allowed to have an emotional response. However, you need to like kind of limit it at some point, right? So it's okay to feel the emotions, but what we do after that is what matters, right? So before I go to answer Spiritual Mind's question in the chat, which you can't see, am I able to pull this back up now? I'm really sorry if that foul stuff is still there. Give me one sec. We're good. Okay. Oh, man. So chat's back, folks, if you want to type in the chat. I apologize for the earlier mess. So before I answer Spiritual Mind's question, I just wanted to say, like, after you have those, feel those emotions, acknowledge them, you have to go through this process of understanding, like, and I talked about this at the beginning of this talk, like what things are in your control and what things aren't. Because that's why I put that at the beginning of this talk. What's not in my control, I don't get to pick the questions. I don't get to pick my interviewers. I don't get to pick whether or not someone else happened to do awesome that day. These things are not in my control. So once you start to acknowledge, okay, why am I feeling sad about this? I didn't get the interview. Okay, like acknowledge that. That's an okay feeling to have. But now you have to understand, like, it's already done. There's literally nothing in your control to change that past event. So do you put more energy into it or do you stop? I recommend you don't put any more energy into it. The next part, like the frustration, right? Or like feeling angry about those questions. Those things are not in my control at all. So, okay, acknowledge why you're having that feeling, but try to understand that's because of something that's not in your control. Okay, don't put more energy into it. So I think it's important to have those emotions, acknowledge them, and then see why you're having them, and then make a decision about whether or not that's in your control. Because all of the things that aren't in your control, investing more time and energy into the stuff that's not in your control is not going to help you. But if we can start to identify the things that are in our control, that's what we need to focus on. So back to Spiritual Mind's question in the chat. Can you please share how you prepare for interviews? What's your preparation strategy? What things do you revise? Okay, so this is the big answer to this. The three major areas that you have in, say, like a big tech interview, or in general, most interviews are kind of like this. Just checking chat. Sorry. You have coding questions, you have system design questions, and behavioral interview questions. For your coding questions, I would say lead code or ask ChatGPT for example interview questions. You could even, if you're asking ChatGPT or your favorite LLM, you could even say for a developer working in this language and at this level, right? They can probably tailor something that's going to help. And I would practice those questions. And I said this earlier in the live stream, but I think that, sorry, I lost my train of thought. For your, for lead code questions, like it's, it's like a unique skill set. So I think you should be practicing them and they're going to help for your interviews, but like, that's why you're practicing them. So that's what I would do for that part. On the system design one, you could literally go looking at, like, you can search on Google or Bing, whatever you want to use. You can find example system design questions. Same thing with asking an LLM. For both of these, I recommend that you practice talking them out. So don't just sit there and draw it out and like, that's it. Like literally talk, like, you heard of rubber ducking when you're programming? Like I'm trying to look on my desk to see if there's anything I can pick up, but I don't have anything super interesting. So no, talk to something on your desk, right? Pick up something, put it up and talk to it. So when you're answering the question, you can be debugging the question to something on your desk. For your system design questions, do the same thing. Strategy that I like to use is that I will make lists of questions and I answer them top to bottom. And as soon as I get stuck, I go the opposite way and work bottom to top. And that helps me not get to a point where I'm memorizing things because there's too much randomization. Because as soon as I start to memorize things, I'm like, well, I'm not going to get one of these questions on the interview. I have to understand it. So I can't just be memorizing. And then the final thing for behavioral interviews, I did plug my course earlier. I will put it back in the chat if you have not seen the link, if you're just joining. This is a course that I just launched today with Ryan Murphy for working through behavioral interviews. The advice there is high level. You want to research the companies that you're applying for. You want to understand their key competencies, their the core things that they focus on. And a lot of big tech companies publish this stuff. Like Amazon has leadership principles, right? That's a well-known thing. It's published on their website. You want to go through those and you want to, again, you can use an LLM for this. Actually, I have a free resource for this. One sec. Let me put this into the chat too. I want to get, I always give people a heads up on this one because it's not obvious, but this product, which I'm going to link, when you go, if you go to check it out, it's free. It says to name a price. You can put, and I recommend you put zero. It's literally $0, so don't pay anything. It's just a PDF. I repeat, do not pay anything, but you add it to your cart, put $0 in. It's a PDF, and it's just an example of using a prompt. There's no magic. And you can get like ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you want to use to give you example interview questions. So there's that as a resource. Burhan, I did see your question on TikTok. I will come back to that in just a sec. So for the behavioral questions, I do the same thing where I make lists of them related to the key competencies. And I also try to make sure that I have scenarios from my experience that line up with the key competencies. So for example, customer focus is a common key competency, or communication or collaboration, teamwork, these types of things. So I try to make sure I have different scenarios from my work experience that I can highlight these types of things. And then I do what I said for the for the coding ones and the system design. I literally talk to something, or if you have someone you can talk to, even better, and go through these questions. And you just want to make sure that it's feeling natural as you're answering them. And you want to make sure that you're focused on what the goal of the question is, not just spending time talking about the details of the technology. Because behavioral interviews are focused on getting information about behavior, not how amazing and how cool this technology is that you got to work on. So just a heads up. So spiritual mind, I hope that helps. What things do you revise? I would say that that's based on feedback and practice, or if I fail an interview, which is what we're going to talk about right now, and that's where I'll go through what I failed and see where I need to adjust. Burhan, so how important is asking interviewers a few questions at the end of the interview? I think it's a really good opportunity, but I have my perspective on this is like there's a couple aspects. And I always try to clarify, like, I have my opinion, and my opinion can be very different than the next person's. So, the recommendation I have is that if you have time to ask questions, you should be asking questions. I think sometimes people have this expectation that, like, you need to impress the interviewer. Like, you need to have a question that's going to be so impressive to the interviewer. They're like, oh, like, such a good question. Like, good job on you for doing that. I don't really feel that way. I think there's types of questions that you can ask that show that you are genuinely curious in the role, that makes the interviewer feel that you are, that you're genuinely interested. Like, it's not just another, interview you're going through. It's like you're paying attention to the products or the, like the vision, the direction the company's going, that kind of stuff. So I think there's things that can stand out that way, and those might be good questions. My personal recommendation, I said this earlier, that I like interviews feeling more like a conversation. And I basically tell interviewees, like, when there's time at the end, I literally I don't know if anyone I've ever interviewed will watch these, but I say to people at the end, I say, you got about X number of minutes left, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have, except math questions. Because I mean it. Like, I'm not going to answer math questions because I hate them, but I'll answer anything they want to know about the company that I can answer, the team, what we work on, anything that I'm able to that they're curious about, I want to help answer for them. So, and even the student I was talking to yesterday, the advice that I gave him was like, I kind of, because he was asking about this, and I turned it around and I said, like, look, like, I don't want this to sound sarcastic, so I don't mean for it to sound like facetious at all, but like, when you're applying to these jobs and getting these interviews, like, you want to work there, right? And he's like, yeah. And I said, okay, like, name me a couple companies, like, for your internships. If you could go work at them, like, you'd be excited to go work there. So he listed a couple, and I said, great, okay. So, like, and he caught himself. He named a company. He was like, no, he's like, I think I just said that because of, like, the name. He's like, but here's another one that, like, I want to work there because of X. I said, great. So you've identified companies that you want to work at. And I said, now imagine that you have an opportunity to ask someone who works there very closely to the space you would be in. I said, imagine you got that job. So when you're asked this, or you're put in this position to ask questions, imagine that you just got the job. What are you curious about? Right? Like, what are you genuinely curious about? And instead of trying to think of, like, what's a question that will impress someone, like, I go into, as the interviewer, I go into that part of the interview thinking, like, I need to sell this position to the interviewee. I want to make sure that they're impressed. Like, they're like, hell yeah, this is going to be a cool spot to work. That's what I'm hoping to do. That's what I'm prepared for. So if they're like, hey, can you tell me about the team dynamics? I'm like, oh, here we go. Like, you're going to be working with these awesome people. Here's how things look. Or, what does a typical day look like? And I'm like, you're going to be in meetings all day. No, I'm just kidding. But I want to make sure that they have an understanding and this opportunity to know what it's going to be like to be on the job. So that's my recommendation for questions at the end of interviews, is like, if you're talking to someone like me, I just want to make sure that you get the information you want. In another cases, I think showing curiosity and genuine interest in the job is what can shine there. Yeah, and then, as you mentioned, and sorry folks, you can't see this in the shared chat because it's TikTok, but yeah, it's also good to show them that you are on the same page with them 100%. So it's like this good alignment opportunity at the end. But that's what I would recommend for that. Okay, last little part of this is like, okay, where I ended off was, so you just finished bombing the interview. You kind of went through your emotions and got to reflect on them. We got to think about what's in our control and what's not. Actually, we only talked about what's not in our control. Now it's time to actually ask yourself, like, what is in your control? And in my example, I was like, I didn't do well on that coding question. Like it felt embarrassing to me because I'm like, I know that I can program well. No doubt in my mind, I program all the time. I'm not saying that to be cocky, but I'm just like, I know that I can do better than that. But I suck at lead code. Guess what? More lead code it is, right? Like, do more. So that's what I made sure when I was practicing for interviews after that. Just keep doing more lead code because that's clearly a weakness in how I interview. The next part was on the system design part. I had to do this reflection and I said, look, the situation that required me to know about the network card, I'm like, that's something that I'm not ever going to know. And I'm not going to sit here and put more energy into being upset about that. So forget that question. I think that was like sort of luck of the draw is what I would chalk it up to. Had an interviewer that wasn't super helpful, had a question that was pretty crappy, and I bombed it. Okay, that sucks. But the other one that I had, I thought that I answered decently, but if I'm being honest, I don't think that I was super comfortable. So I said, I still need more of that kind of exposure, that type of experience in practicing. And I said, maybe it's a good idea that instead of in my practice, that I'm just talking about these like very hypothetical situations, almost like theoretical. Like, why don't I start trying to think about them in more practical sense? And maybe that would mean that if I'm thinking more about like, what does a physical representation of this look like? If we're talking about a service that is cross geolocated, like I have to think about data centers now. Like, what does this look like physically? I told myself, get a little bit more practical with the examples. And maybe if you get another kind of weird question, at least you can rationalize things a little bit more clearly. And maybe that will help. So I needed to make sure that I was focusing on those things. And I told myself that the behavioral stuff, I did well. And it doesn't mean that I need zero practice, but it means if I have X amount of hours to practice for my interviews, I don't need to use as much time for the behavioral stuff. So that's what was in my control. What just Halo, what is Code Forces? Do share more. By the way, the Code Forces EDU are really cool. I'm not sure what that is, so please feel free to share in the chat. Sounds interesting. If others can benefit from that, that would be cool. Okay, so now we know what things are under control. So you have to do this reflection process and figure out how you're going to make adjustments, right? I listed the things that were in my control. The adjustments I needed to make were which areas I was going to focus on. And then from there, it's time to go put it into practice. So that's roughly where I'm going to wrap things up. The point that I want to remind people of is like, it's important that I want to say like if and when. I don't want to say if you fail an interview. I think there's going to be a situation where you don't do well in an interview, and it's okay. It's not the end of the world. It's going to feel bad, and I'm not trying to minimize your feelings for it. It's going to feel bad, but if you do the things I talked about, right? If you can think about what's in your control and what's not, now you're back in a position where you can make decisions about what you can do better for yourself. That means you can move forward and you can make improvements. So instead of sitting there being upset and then being like, well, I don't want to apply to any more jobs, I don't want to go do that other interview that's scheduled. Instead of being in a situation like that, you're already trying to focus on what you need to do to get better. And it's not easy. So I don't want to sit here and pretend like, hey, don't worry, it's so easy. Just like, don't feel sad. And like, did you try not being sad and just coding more? Like, I'm not saying that, but I am saying that like, acknowledge your emotions, and then we have to move on and try to get better. And I can assure you, I feel very confident saying this, that if you're constantly looking at the ways that you can improve and practicing more, statistically, you're going to end up landing that interview. You're going to land that job. and you're going to be able to move on from it. So that's all that I wanted to share. Codeforce is a competitive programming platform. Awesome. Might be something cool for folks to check out if you have not seen that, if you're into that kind of thing. That sounds interesting. It's not my jam. I like just building stuff, but if you like doing competitive programming, that could be cool. But folks, this is the time. Usually I jump over to Reddit. I don't think I'm going to do that again this week. I know I didn't do it last week, but I am going to be live streaming in the morning. So I figured I might do my last rounds of advertisements once more and remind you that I'll be live streaming in the morning. So this is your chance. If you have questions, I will stay on and answer questions if you keep putting them in here. I think it's still really hard right now due to hiring freezes and mass layoffs. Even if you do all the right things and are crushing all the questions, maybe still no job. 100%. And thanks Elemental Magic's card game for this, because like if we think about what I was saying, right, like what parts of that are in your control? The hiring freezes are not in your control, right? The mass layoffs are not in your control. Okay, these things suck. And I'm not saying that they don't suck, but they're not in our control. So what can we do? We can keep practicing. We can keep looking at the areas where our strengths and weaknesses are, and we focus more on the weaknesses. We keep polishing the strengths and keep bringing up the weaknesses. And that means that when we get these opportunities, when they do come up, we'll be prepared and we'll do better. So thank you. I think that's a really good point. And again, I'm checking Instagram. I see your message there. Thank you. And if anyone else has questions before I sign off, please just dump them in the chat. I will keep answering them as we go here. Is learning backend development, this is on Instagram, from Ashif, is learning backend development worth it in 2024 to get a high-paying remote job? Hell yeah. I don't agree with anyone saying like, sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I mean, I don't agree with people that are saying like AI is going to take all the jobs. It's going to transform how we're doing things. I think I work with a ton of people that do backend development. I work in an entire area of Microsoft that's literally just backend development, like hundreds and hundreds of people. And it literally keeps Office 365 going, and it's tons of work. Lots of super cool stuff, lots of really interesting things going on. I think there's tons of opportunity there. I think there's a lot of competition. I would say, if I had to guess, I don't have stats on this, I think there's a lot more competition in front-end work. And the reason I say that is because I think there are many people who want to get into software engineering, and they start with some type of front-end development. And then if you were to look at the number of people that start off that way, the number is just disproportionately greater than people that are like, I want to go start working in back-end coding. And I think it's because it's less sexy. Like, you don't get to see the changes. It might not seem that cool, but when you're working in front-end, you get to see everything that's happening. So I think there's tons of opportunity in back-end. And I'm not a person that believes that AI is going to replace our jobs. I think it will transform our jobs for sure, 100%. It will continue to do so. And I think that if you're staying on top of AI and always looking at what AI is sort of obsoleting for you or making easy for you, like the mundane work goes away, great. You get to focus on higher level problems. So will it evolve? Yes. Is it going away? I don't think so anytime soon. So hopefully, Ashif, hopefully that helps. Thank you for the question. Burhan, you're very welcome. I hope that is a good start to your day, and I do appreciate you joining here. So thanks very much. So let's see, back to Twitch here. So the way AI will take jobs is to cause companies to hire more programmers to develop AI products. The actual AI itself won't do anything to speak of. I'm kind of this mindset, right? There's going to be, I've talked about this before, I think, and I kind of just hinted at it, but I think AI will replace mundane things. The more advanced AI gets, the more the level of like what's mundane and repetitive and boring, like the more things that it can do. But we're always going to need people to be doing these things. And you say, okay, well, what about the AI agents? And it's like, sure, okay. But until someone has a ton of AI agents replacing a software company, like is it possible? But like, sure, but I don't know, man. I don't see that being. I think that would be more infuriating to if you were to look at the conversation between AI agents trying to build products. It would probably be going in circles like crazy. Not to say we don't as humans, but I think that we're a long way off from that being something to be concerned about personally. Sam K, hello. Good to see you. I am sorry that we're basically about to sign off here. So thank you for joining, but we are towards the end here. And then Elemental Magic's Guardian was saying, if you're not a machine learning specialist, even less chance for a job. Yeah, I think that there's still lots of opportunity though, right? You got people that are trying to, it's like, it's the hot thing to be on the side of AI that you're helping produce, like the systems for the models and advancing that technology without a doubt. Like that's a hot spot right now. But it's like there's still going to be people that are building with this stuff. So and there's lots of things to build. The reality is there's so many problems out there to go solve that I'm just not concerned that these jobs go away. The big tricky thing has been things like hiring freezes. There's been I don't want to get into like politics and stuff because it's not what I like to talk about, but the idea around like interest rates, like when interest rates are high, it's difficult for big tech companies. And I don't know all of the information and data points around this, but if you read about how like basically big tech companies are able to leverage to use leverage to grow, right? And when interest rates are high, it's very difficult to do. When they're low, they can do it a lot more effectively. So when we're in these situations where interest rates are high, it's a lot trickier to have a lot of explosive growth in big tech. So something to think about. But these things will change. So I'm not It's hard right now, and I don't want to dismiss that. I always want to acknowledge I'm fortunate to be in the position I'm in. So I don't mean to talk about this and disregard other people. I think that's unfair. But I do think that, again, if we think about what's in our control, you have to focus on what you can put your energy into. We can't sit around and be upset that it's hard to get jobs. Like, yes, acknowledge that and then realize that part's not in your control. What's in your control? You can keep building, you can keep practicing your interviews, you can be refining your resume, you can be networking with people. There are so many things that you can and should be doing. And then as the circumstances start to change, as you get more opportunities, getting your resumes out to places, things will work out. Okay, my last little spiel, I kind of did an ad earlier, but I will do it to sign off. So thanks for sticking through this with me. So this is my newsletter. If I scroll back up, it's at weekly.devleader.ca. And this is my ugly face on my newsletter article. So if you want to know what I'm going to be talking about, my live streams, it is at this site. If I go back to here, just so you can see it on Substack, there's other entries here. Substack does also allow me to import my podcast, which I will plug very briefly here. Sorry, flashbang warning. My podcast is where I talk about software engineering topics with different individuals. I've had some really interesting people on, and it's really exciting for me to be able to do this. If you want to hear about different people's software engineering journeys and the areas that they focus on, I think that this is worth checking out. You can find it on Spotify. It's on Apple Podcasts. I don't know what that's called. It's everywhere podcasts are. Thanks, Sam. I appreciate that. And so you can definitely check out the podcast. It's one of those things like they're usually like 40 minutes to an hour long if you just want to hear a conversation. Like instead of me talking at you like this, it's me interviewing someone in like a conversational setting. One of the last people I interviewed was Rita Iglesias. She's a pretty big content creator on TikTok, on Instagram, and Twitter, and she got a really cool story. Like, she came from an acting background, and I was very surprised how much of like her like theater and acting experiences really tied well into software engineering. I thought it was super cool. I interviewed Ethan Evans. Ethan Evans is an ex Amazon VP. I don't want to say unfortunately, maybe fortunately, depends how you look at it. He went pretty viral on social media a couple weeks ago. I'm not going to share exactly why, but if you go search Ethan Evans, I got to have a conversation with him. It was really cool. I'm not trying to skim over people, but yeah, I'm just kind of scrolling. There's lots of awesome people I've got to chat with. Scott Hanselman is probably sort of like the biggest, like, I like to call him a celebrity in my opinion. So like a celebrity guest that I've had. So it's been really fun to do that. I'll plug this, which is my Code Commute YouTube channel. So if you're watching this, you probably already know I have my normal YouTube channel. Code Commute is one where I talk to you while I'm driving. It's not a live stream, it's just a vlog. So I sit in traffic and I get upset about traffic, and then I talk to you about software engineering. And I decided to do it. It's been pretty fun. There's some videos like this one, they get more views than my channel with 7,000 subscribers. So some people like it. It's pretty fun. And then quick plug on Brand Ghost. If you're interested in content creation, Brand Ghost is the SaaS that I'm building. If you see how I create content online and that seems interesting to you, or if you have a small business and you're like, dude, I don't want to dedicate time to like posting content on social media platforms, Brand Ghost could be a huge help for you. But this is what I'm building on the side. So the fact that I'm not blogging anymore is because I'm writing code instead of writing blogs, and it's all for Brand Ghost. And finally, the last thing I'll mention, and I showed this earlier, this is the Nailing the Behavioral Interview course on Dome Train. Currently 30% off, so check that out. And this is basically a lot of what I talked about this evening. And the curriculum's all here. It's 6 hours long. I did this with Ryan Murphy. Ryan's an awesome guy, so we have more courses coming to Dome Train from this perspective, because historically Dome Train is a lot of C# and .NET, and Ryan and I are going to be building out this other part of the sort of offering. So feel free to check that out. That's freshly launched. And I see one more question. No, that's okay. Thank you. You got to be careful with the chat. Okay, folks, I think that's it. Thanks for listening to me blab about the ads and stuff. I appreciate that. I think that's all. So if you are up bright and early, or maybe you're at the opposite side of the world and it's just a more convenient time, 7 a.m. PST, give or take a couple of minutes, because I have a call right before that. I want to be online. Be talking about Azure Blob Storage. We're going to make a little application that can put stuff into Blob Storage. We'll take the bytes back out. We will talk about SaaS URLs, which is pretty cool. And this is a format that I've done before, where I'm not going to, how do I say this? I'm going to be kind of going through the topics that I will make a YouTube tutorial about. So you'll get to see me mess around with it, screw some things up. It's going to be rough. It always is. And then I will release like polished YouTube tutorials to follow up on that. So if you check out the live stream and you're like, okay, this is fun, but I'm kind of lost, or if you miss it, that's okay, because the tutorials will go live hopefully this week, and if not, then early next week. And yeah, they'll be on Azure Blob Storage. So thank you so much, folks. I think that's it. I don't see any other questions as I kind of poke around here. I do appreciate all the questions that come in. You know, you guys make this, because otherwise I'd be talking to no one, and might as well be my YouTube videos, right? So I do appreciate you being here. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for the folks that keep coming back. It's weird. It's like, it's really cool to see that there's some folks that keep coming back, because I don't know, like, I've never met you, but it's it feels good. And I'm happy that it's hopefully helpful for you. So before I get emotional, we'll sign off here. Thanks again, folks. See you bright and early.